The Last Word with Jonathan Capehart and Phil Lawrence starts right now. Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, Jen, we're going to keep the conversation going about what you were talking about in the early hours of your show about the president's speech last night and the markers he laid down and what, if anything, we can all do about it. I'm still just sort of surprised by what we saw 24 hours ago. I mean, yes and no, but for real.
I mean, I don't know if I'm surprised or if I'm just like, what the hell just happened? That's what it is. But there's a lot to untangle, which we tried to do, and I'm so glad you're doing too, because I think that's part of what we can do here.
Right. And so I'm going to get to it, and you go enjoy your weekend, Jen.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Have a great show.
All right, thank you. Well, tonight, with just 109 days until the 2026 midterm elections, we begin with the reality check. Because after what we saw from Donald Trump last night, the context of his speech just cannot be ignored. First off, Donald Trump is politically weak. Take a look at these numbers. Just 37% of Americans approve of the job Donald Trump is doing as president, according to the latest Washington Post Ipsos poll. And on the issue that often determines how voters feel about their president, the economy, the numbers are even worse. 65% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy. And then there is his war of choice with Iran. 69% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of Iran. Trump's poll numbers are down. Gas prices are up. His war is unpopular. And 109 days from now, voters could hand Republicans a major defeat in the midterms. That's the real political reality for Donald Trump, who then chose last night to return once again to his obsession with the 2020 election. Georgia Senator Jon Ossoff, who is up for re-election this year, offered this assessment of what we all saw.
I heard a failed president desperately casting about for excuses to meddle in the upcoming election if he can, or to discredit the result when he loses decisively, as I expect he will. I heard a president who, as his war spirals and as prices keep climbing for families across the country, is, as always, focused on his personal grievances, focused on his personal shame and humiliation, and above all, focused on his personal fear of the accountability that will come when we win this fall. He tried to steal the presidency when he lost it the first time. And that's why we can't be complacent. That's why we cannot dismiss this threat to voting rights. He's making his intentions very clear. And Lawrence, it's not enough just to be alert to it. We have to take action right now.
We have to take action right now. And that gets to the question we are facing today. What does that action look like? Which brings us to two ideas we have to be able to hold in our heads at the same time. The first is that there is something almost pathetic about Donald Trump's speech last night, which really comes across in this other view of the East Room. J.D. Vance, Susie Wiles, Marco Rubio, Todd Blanche, Kash Patel behind them. All the president's enablers sitting there watching an 80-year-old man subject the country yet again to the conspiracy theories and lies that have consumed him for years. It reminds us where Donald Trump's power comes from. Republicans who have chosen to enable him. And that brings us to the second idea we have to hold in our heads. Tragically, for the country, pathetic does not mean powerless, because elected Republicans have shown again and again that they won't stop him. Certainly not the ones in Congress. What about the elected Republicans in the states, the ones who run elections? A few honorably stood up to Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election results, and we know how that turned out. Those Republicans have been booted out of office, while the Trump supporters who attacked the Capitol for him were rewarded with pardons and possibly federal taxpayer payoffs. We don't know what will happen, but if you can imagine it, it can happen. And people who care about our democracy can't be caught flat-footed. There is another outcome of Donald Trump's relentless attacks on our of our election system, and it has happened before. It can backfire. After Trump lost the 2020 presidential election, Republicans still had a chance to keep control of the U.S. Senate. All they had to do was win one of the two Senate runoffs in Georgia. But they lost both. As those runoffs approached, Donald Trump was repeatedly telling his supporters that the election system could not be trusted. David Frum writes this in The Atlantic about what happened next. Quote, in rural and conservative areas of the state, 752,000 Georgians who had voted in November stayed home in January. Turnout rose by 228,000 in Democratic-leaning areas. Trump had discouraged his own voters and energized his foes. His party lost both seats and any hope of retaining the Senate. Now, that doesn't mean the same thing will happen this November, but it is a reminder of the potential political cost of telling your own supporters over and over again that the very system they are being asked to participate in cannot be trusted. And while we are all watching for what new thing, if anything, Trump and his administration do to attack our elections, Republicans are running the same old playbook they always do, making it harder for people who don't vote for them to vote. For the people who don't vote for them to vote. New reporting from the New York Times finds that in multiple North Carolina counties, there are disputes over efforts to reduce Sunday voting and move early voting locations away from college campuses. North Carolina, of course, is the state where the Democrats have the best chance to flip a Republican-held Senate seat, a race popular former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper is leading in. The Times obtained text messages and emails showing a former top North Carolina Republican Party official hired by the Republican state auditor as an election liaison, pressuring county board members to adjust their early voting locations and hours. North Carolina's Republican state auditor Dave Boliak has defended the changes to early voting and denied that his office directed specific changes. But voting rights activists said the changes are a blatant attempt by GOP leaders to make it harder for Black voters and students who tend to vote for Democrats to cast ballots this fall. At North Carolina A&T State University, the nation's largest HBCU, students have been protesting to restore an on-campus early voting site ahead of the midterms. Here is rising senior Xavion Davis.
On-campus polling sites are not just a matter of convenience. They are a matter of essential access. Many of us don't have cars and live on campus. We are juggling jobs, classes, leadership roles all at the same time, and for many of us, getting off campus to vote isn't feasible without taking time away from other responsibilities or spending money that we need elsewhere. Removing these polling sites adds barriers to our ability to complete our civic duty while we're on campus. College is where many of us build lifelong habits, and voting is one of the most important habits to build as a citizen. We should be able to vote in the same place that we live, learn, and love, and grow, just like everyone else.
Leading off our discussion tonight, Bishop William J. Barber II, president and senior lecturer at Repairers of the Breach. He is director of the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at Yale Divinity School. And Anderson Clayton, chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party. Anderson, let me start with you. The state auditor's office says the total number of early voting hours and sites has actually increased statewide. So why do you believe these specific changes will still make it harder for people to vote?
Because Republicans are strategically targeting both student voters and also Black and brown communities across North Carolina to demoralize and disenfranchise voters in these communities that have access right now to these polling locations. And we have seen restricted access, as you just said, Jonathan, from both A&T University this last year, from also Western Carolina University, where we have got students that protested every step of the way possible at the Board of Elections meeting in Jackson County. County to make sure that they kept that voting site on campus. And we've seen Republicans restrict these voting sites every step of the way in North Carolina because they are afraid of the voters that are going to come out in November against the policies that they've enacted, both in Washington, D.C., but also in Raleigh, North Carolina over the last year.
And Bishop Barber, as you well know, Sunday voting has long been associated with Souls to the Polls efforts in the Black community. What would reducing Sunday voting mean for the people and churches you work with?
Well, what they're trying to do is, as she said, is to suppress, but there's a history here. That's why we're calling for 100 days of mobilization and 1,000 marches to the polls during early voting. We need to march in the states to the polls, not necessarily in D.C. And because North Carolina proves that if you organize and have fair voting, then progressives can win in the South. Now, this what they're doing now is not new. In 2007, we won early day, same day registration, early voting, North Carolina NAACP and others. 2008, we put 1.5 new voters in the polls. 2008, Obama lost on election day, but won because of early voting and the same day registration. Then in 2012, Republicans took over and they went after. The first thing they went after was this early voting and Sunday voting. Then you had Moral Monday and 100,000 people in the street and 1,500 people got arrested. Then Section 5 was gutted by the Supreme Court. They passed the worst voter suppression bill since Shelby. We filed and beat them in 2016 and proved that they were engaged in racism with surgical intention. This is a long fight because they are scared, and they are after Black voters, they're after brown voters, they're after fusion voters, white voters, students. They know that North Carolina has proven that when the vote is fair, they can't win. North Carolina is the only southern state that has sent a voter suppressionist home, Pat McCrory, who was Trump before Trump, and has consistently elected statewide progressives. And they know this. And so, John, what they want to do is not allow people to be able to go from church to the polls on Sundays, not allow students, whether they're at HBCUs, at Western Carolina, because they want to suppress the populations they know that don't go along with their extreme agenda, which is why on the first day of early voting, we're going to have hundreds of marches to the polls down sidewalks and streets, because we've seen this before. We've beat them before. And lastly, Trump only got elected by 183,000 votes when he got elected. 1.2 million poor and low-wage voters didn't vote. They know that they are in trouble if we mobilize and if we vote.
I don't know if you can see Anderson, but she's giving you snaps and head nods through your whole answer there. Anderson, Republicans now have significant power over election administration in North Carolina. How can Democrats overcome that?
We are the only state in the country, Jonathan, that has right now a state auditor that controls our elections. And that is because the Republicans at our state legislative level chose to strip our Democratic governor that voters overwhelmingly elected in 2024 from the ability to keep appointing state board of election members in North Carolina, because they knew that when Democrats have the ability to appoint nonpartisan members, that we have free and fair elections in North Carolina, and Republicans are afraid of that. And we saw that both in 2024, when Republicans took 6 months to deny an election result with Justice Allison Riggs, who was one of the last statewide certified elections from 2024, because Republicans retroactively challenged 68,000 ballots in North Carolina, trying to throw them out from that election cycle. We know that Republicans are willing to do anything right now to win elections, and Democrats have been on the ground, and also unaffiliated Republicans, people that just care about the election integrity of our state right now, have been out across all 100 counties in North Carolina at Board of Elections meetings, submitting public comments. And if you all want to get involved with voter protection efforts across North Carolina right now, please go to ncdp.org and sign up to volunteer today. We need your time and your talent and the ability to come out and preserve the right to vote for so many people. But I want North Carolinians to hear me clearly tonight when I say we cannot protect any vote that is not cast. So please make sure that everybody is getting out to cast their votes this year, and trust the fact that we have both nonpartisan partners on the ground and also the state party in North Carolina that wants to make sure that every vote is counted that is cast in the state. And it is an honor to be on here with Bishop Barber.
Bishop Barber, we're about to run out of time, but our voters, particularly Black voters you talk to, already activated because of what Republicans in the Supreme Court have already done to suppress their votes this year.
And more so because the state, when Trump said to gerrymander the first congressional district, which is started black, they did it. We led a 51-mile march from Wilson to Raleigh. Thousands of people joined, thousands of people signed up to do canvassing and moving. But they also made a mistake. They based that gerrymandering on 41% of the voter turnout. So we know if it goes up, the gerrymander becomes dummy-mandered. People are tired. But and Jonathan, it's because they are hurting, they're poor, they're low wage, they don't have health care. We know that if we mobilize this pain and toward a vision, and they know that North Carolina is a fusion state, that black and white and brown and students and others coming together have and can continually fundamentally shift this elected. This is why they cheat, because they know they can't win in a fair election. But this is why we must have a massive movement fusion vote, and we're announcing 100 days of mobilization, 1,000 marches across this country on the first day of early voting. If we're going to change Washington, we got to march in the states.
Bishop William Barber, Anderson Clayton, thank you both very much for joining us tonight. Powerhouse way to start off this hour. Last night at this hour, Lawrence got first reaction to Trump's speech from Congressman Jim Hines, the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee and a member of the exclusive Gang of Eight, which has access to the country's most sensitive intelligence. Now, you know Congressman Hines of Connecticut is a serious and even-handed speaker. He is not someone who engages in hyperbole. So when Ranking Member Hines sounds the alarm, we need to listen.
We know how the president feels about Georgia. You ran the clip. When he lost Georgia, did he concede? No. He called up Brad Raffensperger, Republican Secretary of State, find me 11,000 votes. Clearly corrupt. No one can look at that and say that's anything other than criminal, but also corrupt. Right. So when Jon Ossoff wins, this is just one example. And remember, there's a Senate race in Michigan. There's a Senate race in North Carolina. Donald Trump looks at that and he says, my people in Venezuela, because remember, Donald Trump and Marco Rubio are running Venezuela, have found secret intelligence that shows that in Caracas, Maduro's cousin manipulated voting machines in Georgia. This is how this happens. This is how American democracy goes away. Now, a lot of people know me. I've been in this position for some period of time. I'm not an alarmist. In fact, I get a lot of guff for being a little overly optimistic and overly calm. But understand what happened tonight. The president was setting the context. He was setting the basis for him to turn around at midnight on Election Day and say, I warned you. I warned you back in July that the Chinese were doing XYZ and the Venezuelans were doing XYZ and all this terrible stuff. It happened tonight. I am deploying federal officers from the Department of Homeland Security to 7 states. They will be seizing ballot boxes in those states because we know that lots of undocumented aliens voted in those things. So we are seizing ballot boxes. Now, Lawrence O'Donnell, what happens when all of a sudden we've lost the chain of custody of 70 ballot boxes in critical? That is the moment in which American democracy dies.
And that is where we will pick it up with our next guest. Joining us now, Nevada Secretary of State Cisco Aguilar. He is the chair of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State. Secretary Aguilar, to that dark scenario Congressman Hines laid out, as the person responsible for overseeing Nevada's elections, walk us through how you would protect the state's election systems, how you would protect, if you could, the chain of custody if ballots indeed were seized.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, for having me. It's an honor to be here. Look, Secretary's on the front line against all of these threats. I think what we heard last night and what we heard this morning from the Secretary, or from the Secretary of DHS, is that they're coming after secretaries because they know that we have a responsibility to protect the elections. And we know that 26 is about 28. Secretaries elected in 26 are going to protect the presidential election in 28. And so we have to stand strong. These threats are just things that come at us every single day. It's what we have to face. But we take our responsibilities very seriously. The chain of custody of the votes. Nevada's system is very different from what it was in 2020. We've made a substantial investment in our system without the help of the federal government. We've had to protect our cybersecurity because the federal government abandoned us during this process. It's really interesting. They're attacking their own, but it's the foreign adversaries who are attacking us, and they give them a chance but they say they're going to put secretaries of states in jail if we don't do what we're supposed to do or adhere to their demands. Look, we're following the law. Secretaries don't have the ability to determine when they're going to follow the law. We have to follow the law every single time, because every time we make a decision, we get sued. We go through that process, but at the end of the day, we win because, again, we're following the law. And whatever they want to do to come after us, they can't. But at the end of the day, it's Secretary of States who are going to make sure that the ballots get counted. But before that, we have to make sure voters feel confident in the process. We have to make them feel confident when they show up at a polling location. We have to continue to make sure access is a priority. In Nevada, we run some of the safest, most secure and accessible elections in the country, and we will continue to do that with or without the federal government because we know states have the responsibility to run elections according to the Constitution.
Well, Secretary, Nevada is in an unusual position where you are a Democratic Secretary of State serving alongside a Republican governor. If Trump pressured Governor Lombardo to intervene, where does the authority lie? And does that concern you at all?
It does concern me, but I know that our governor is a former sheriff of Clark County. He understands the rule of law. He has publicly stated two things. One, he does not believe in the federalization of our elections. He believes our elections should be run at the state level because the legislature and the governor determine how our elections are run, not the president of the United States. Second, he's made a very public statement that he doesn't believe in federal agents being at polling locations. And that is critical, especially in East Las Vegas, where majority of our citizens there are Latino. Latinos are 30% of Nevada's electorate, and they are eligible to vote. They have the fundamental right to vote. Latinos have built our state. They continue to drive our economy. More than 50% of every new business in Nevada is Latino owned. That is economic power, and that's what they're trying to stop because they know they can't win these voters moving forward, given the policies they've implemented, given where they're taking the economy, how hard they're making it for Latinos to survive and to move forward. But we have to continue to push back. And these threats are not intimidating to secretaries. Secretaries are tough. And I hope people realize how important those races are in 26, because without good secretaries, strong secretaries, somebody's going to fold to these threats, and they're going to fold fast. And you see that in some red states, but you do not see it in Democratic states. Democratic secretaries of state are standing up and pushing back and telling the truth when the truth needs to be spoken.
Nevada Secretary of State Cisco Aguilar, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word. And coming up, Trump claims the U.S. is winning big in Trump's war in Iran. But as Trump's war enters day 140, the words forever war have entered the discussion. Congressman Adam Smith, the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, joins us next. Today is day 140 of Donald Trump's unauthorized and illegal war in Iran. And in his 25-minute speech last night, this is all Donald Trump had to say about that war.
We are likewise winning big in Iran, and you will see the fruits of that labor very, very shortly.
Just a delusional statement about a war that has killed 14 American service members and made prices soar here at home and across the globe. And as for very shortly, nearly half of voters think Trump's war will drag on well into 2027. A recent poll from The Economist and YouGov found that 46% of Americans think the war will go on a year or more. Add to that, the phrase forever war has entered the chat as the conflict appears to be in a stalemate. The New York Times' chief diplomatic correspondent writes in a new analysis, with diplomacy at a dead end, at least for now, a frustrated Mr. Trump finds himself back at war, the ceasefire broken, the strait blocked. The memorandum of understanding, he said, achieves everything we set out to accomplish, despite wildly divergent interpretations of it, is in tatters after less than a month. Both sides look to the Memorandum of Understanding as the continuation of the war by other means, not as a bridge to peace, said Ali Vaez, Iran project director for the International Crisis Group. Without a long-term strategy to produce a sustainable settlement, he said, there's a risk of creating the circumstances for a forever war. With 109 days until the midterms, Democrats are making sure voters know they do not support a forever war in Iran or more U.S. troops to Iran or a blank check to try to help Trump save face in Iran. Congressman Brendan Boyle, the top Democrat on the House Budget Committee, put it this way.
You might think, given that the top issue in the 2024 election was affordability, and that the top issue today is affordability, you might think the majority would want to spend time in a reconciliation bill addressing the number one issue on voters' minds. Well, I can tell you, 47 pages in their bill, 6,560 words, and not one word on bringing down costs for the American people. Not one word. Instead, we have tens of billions of dollars for the most unpopular war in American history.
Joining us now, Congressman Adam Smith of Washington State. He is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Smith, thank you for coming back to The Last Word. Have you been briefed on the current situation in Iran that we are, quote, winning big, according to President Trump?
We have not gotten a direct brief. My staff works very diligently to keep in touch with the Pentagon and try to find out what's going on. But no, there hasn't been a brief to Congress for quite some time. And look, there's nothing really secret going on here. Trump just keeps thinking that he's going to drop a few more bombs in Iran and he's going to win, despite the fact there's no evidence of that. And what he's really creating is what you just described, sort of perpetual global chaos. You know, given how important that region is, certainly for oil, but for other things as well, as this war just keeps going on and on and on, it is massively disruptive, certainly to the U.S. economy, to the global economy as well. And Trump has no better idea now how he's going to get out of it than he has at any point in this process.
Mm-hmm. Congressman, do you support blocking the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, as some of your fellow Democrats are?
Well, it depends on what. I don't support just blocking it no matter what. I mean, look, we need to support our military. Our troops need their pay raises. They do pay. They need housing allowances. You know, the basic oversight that we need to conduct needs to be done. And I think that's an important point. If we decide we're just not going to pass legislation to protest Trump, well, that weakens the legislative branch in favor of the executive branch. So no, I'm not blanketly going to say no matter what, I'm not going to pass an NDAA, but I don't support the one that, well, I have major problems with the one that we're putting together now, A, because it doesn't do anything about the Iran war, B, because it's $1.15 trillion. It's a massive defense budget, in part to help continue to fund a war that's taking us in the wrong direction. So on the substance of the bill, I have deep concerns and I'm likely going to oppose it. But no, I wouldn't blanket say no matter what, we're not going to pass anything. This is how we exercise oversight if we do it right.
Mm-hmm. Let me get you on another topic we've been talking about last night on this program. Your colleague, Congressman Jim Himes, excuse me, warned about what Trump's election obsession could lead to. Do you have any concerns about how Trump might try to involve the U.S. military, especially with the emphasis he put on malign foreign actors last night?
Absolutely. I think it's more likely that he will rely on sort of the personal police force that he's created over at the Department of Homeland Security. Remember, in last year's reconciliation bill, the Republicans plussed that up by $190 billion. This is an agency that's yearly budget is like 60. So they gave them 3 times as much money, well, on top of what they got in that year. And we've seen the result with ICE agents all across the country. It's like Trump's own personal paramilitary force more. But yeah, no, I think he could also try to use the military. And I completely agree with Jim Himes' remarks. I think this is an incredibly dangerous moment for democracy. And you can even marry the two. We've got this issue of Trump, basically setting up for the possibility of, overturning legitimate elections, and also the war in Iran. I mean, he threatened that the U.S. was going to take over the Strait of Hormuz and charge the rest of the world to go through that. I mean, freedom of navigation is a cornerstone of what we believe. We are witnessing a fascist takeover of this country. And I really hope the Republican Party wakes up to that and starts helping us, those of us who want to stop it, stop it.
Congressman Adam Smith of Washington State, thank you, as always, for coming to The Last Word.
Thank you.
Coming up, new reporting reveals the ICE agent who shot and killed a 26-year-old Maine father had a history of alleged mental health struggles and violent behavior. That's next. We're learning disturbing new details about the ICE officer who shot and killed a 26-year-old father with legal work authorization during a traffic stop in Maine who was not the target. Several of his close relatives tell the Associated Press that David Bruyette is, quote, an Army veteran who has struggled with serious mental health issues since early childhood and never should have been given a badge and gun to patrol American streets. David Bruyette has a history of terrifying and violent behavior, according to those relatives. They accuse him of attacking women in his life over the years, and one shared a voicemail with the AP from last winter in which he told her that he thought someone should slit her throat. His ex-wife, Ashley Bruyette, told the Associated Press that she divorced him after he became physically violent with her while she was pregnant. Abuse that she says continued after their divorce. His second ex-wife, who asked not to be identified for fear of retaliation, also alleges physical and verbal abuse against her and her daughter. This comes after earlier reporting in The Atlantic revealed that David Bruyette was, quote, hired by ICE this year from the Department of Veterans Affairs Police, according to the senior official. David Bruyette refused to comment. An ICE spokesperson dismissed requests for comment as an attempt to, quote, dox our law enforcement officers, adding, quote, the ICE officer in question has nearly a decade of federal law enforcement experience with required training, including use of force training. Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins, who's up for re-election this year, voted to fund ICE last month, while every Democratic senator voted against it. Joining us now, Congressman Chris Pappas, the Democratic nominee for Senate in New Hampshire. Congressman, thank you for coming back to The Last Word. Biddeford, Maine is not that far from New Hampshire. Are New Hampshire residents concerned about what happened? How much of an issue is ICE in New Hampshire?
Well, people are deeply concerned. How could you not find this case completely disturbing and heartbreaking? The fact that this individual, who was not the target of the operations, was gunned down through his windshield with his 3-year-old daughter on the scene. So it's incredibly heartbreaking for his family. There are deep questions that need to be answered here, and that's why there must be a full, impartial investigation to put all the facts on the table. And we have to put ICE under the microscope in Congress. We've been working to try to do this, just to try to insist on some accountability measures and ensuring that we're taking the best practices and standards from law enforcement and applying that to the federal government. But Republicans have resisted us every step of the way. I think this reporting raises serious questions about the hiring process as ICE and Homeland Security has rushed to hire thousands of agents. We need to be continuing to insist on better standards, training, body cameras. There are 40% of offices apparently that haven't implemented body cameras, despite the fact that ICE is sitting on tens of billions of dollars of extra funding that's been given to them by Republicans in Congress without any strings attached. So this is all deeply concerning. This shouldn't be how things work in the United States of America. We need the law to be followed. We need justice for this family, and we need full accountability here.
Well, on the subject of ICE, but also Trump's tax cuts and Medicaid cuts and endless money for Trump's war in Iran, do people understand that in a Democratic Senate, none of that passes?
Well, I think people are connecting the dots, and we're working to do that on the campaign. This is a moment where people are feeling great pain across my state and across the country. We've got a war of choice that's incredibly reckless in Iran, that's surging gas and energy prices for families in New Hampshire. We have these tariffs that last year added $1,700 worth of extra cost to every family in my state. We've got healthcare cuts that are going to devastate Medicaid and hospitals and community health centers and raise premiums for everyone across the board. So people are feeling it right now. And, you know, the president and Republicans in Congress are thumbing their noses at the American people. They think they don't have to answer to the voters. Donald Trump barely brought himself to address the housing issue, didn't even sign a historic bipartisan bill that we put on his desk because he wants to rig the elections instead. So at every turn, they're about centralizing power, corrupting government. They're ignoring the will of the people of this country. And that's why we need checks and balances restored, why we're fighting to hold this tough Senate seat in New Hampshire and flip the majority in the Senate. If we do that, we've got accountability. We can put the people's agenda right on the table. And so I urge people to go to chrispappas.org, join our effort to flip the majority in the Senate. We can do it.
And it should be pointed out, Trump's approval in New Hampshire has dropped 10 points since February, before he started this war with Iran. Congressman Chris Pappas of New Hampshire, Democratic nominee for Senate in New Hampshire. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Good to be with you.
And coming up, a new investigation finds the damage done in Trump's reflecting pool renovation was probably caused by the contractors hired to do the work. That's next. Now for an update on Trump's boondoggle renovation of the reflecting pool here in Washington, D.C. To recap, the reflecting pool work was performed under a no-bid contract awarded to a pool company owned by a Trump donor, though the White House says Trump had nothing to do with that, rushed through to be ready for Trump's July 4th celebrations, which also turned out to be a bust. And as the world now knows, the attempt to color the reflecting pool swimming pool blue failed, and it became a viral green disaster, which is now drained and closed to the public. Trump is desperately trying to shift the blame for the reflecting pool boondoggle, posting today the pool was, quote, so badly damaged by deranged vandals. We are looking for a vandal-proof material. But according to an investigation by the Washington Post, it turns out the peeling blue sealant and persistent algae at the reflecting pool likely weren't the work of deranged vandals after all. They were likely the result of application mistakes made by the contractors Trump hired to do the job. When Post reporters visited the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool on June 25th, they identified 7 locations along the edges where the lining had peeled away in patches ranging from a few inches to 6 feet. Quote, by comparing the 7 locations with satellite imagery, photos, and videos taken during the renovation process, the analysis found that all of the failures occurred at the seams, lines between 2 areas that were painted at different times. 4 experts in waterproofing materials who have decades of experience and have served as educators and expert witnesses in pool-related construction lawsuits, reviewed the Post findings and said the failure pattern strongly suggests errors in the application process. They said that while a precise cause cannot be determined without on-site examination and lab testing, such seams require careful attention and are especially prone to failure. When the Post shared its findings with the White House spokeswoman Taylor Rogers said, and I quote, there were no missteps during the initial repairs to the pool. Unfortunately, deranged individuals made several gashes in the side of the pool and destroyed over 300 feet of the pool siding. Once the necessary repairs to fix the vandalism are complete, the reflecting pool will be restored to all its glory. The Post notes, quote, officials provided no evidence to support the administration's assertion that the pool was vandalized. Joining us now, Jarrett Lay, a visual forensics reporter at the Washington Post. Jarrett, this is a fun story to work on. What did your investigation find was the most likely cause of the peeling at the reflecting pool?
Hi, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Our investigation found that the total evidence pointed to a flaw in the application of the material. But our experts stopped short of a specific diagnosis of that flaw because, as you mentioned, it's important to be able to be on site there with the material, be able to do laboratory testing. That being said, the seams that are created when you put one section down next to an already dried section. Those are particularly ripe for vulnerabilities, such that when we identified this pattern and brought our evidence to these 4 experts in waterproofing materials, they said it was consistent with an application materials. But there are other patterns that are well for helping to illuminate this picture. So for example, in most of the coating failure locations, the dark blue material actually lifts up to reveal more dark blue. Experts told us that this is indicative of an adhesion failure that takes place when you put these 2 dark blue sections next to one another outside the drying window, which is at 4 hours. We went back through all the evidence and we identified that in all the locations where this took place, there was more than a 5-hour gap in the application.
You know, on Monday, President Trump described the reflecting pool as having, quote, 300 yards long slashes.
Yes.
Is there any evidence that supports that? 300 yards?
When we asked for additional evidence of this was caused by vandalism, they did not provide any.
None.
No. But what our investigation illuminates is a thorough interrogation of all the open source evidence that we could gather of the reflecting pool, which, with the benefit of our generous expert sources, we were able to illuminate that these seam lines along which all of these coating failures were located are particularly ripe for this type of failing and peeling if they're not handled correctly in the coating process.
Wow. Washington Post reporter Jarrett Lay, thank you very much. This is one story I am definitely going to keep my tabs on. This is fascinating.
Please
Thank
do.
you very much
Thank
for
you,
coming to the
Jonathan.
last word.
My
And
pleasure.
we will
Thank you.
be right back. And that is tonight's last word. I'll see you tomorrow on The Weekend, where we will be doing more follow-up on Trump's election obsession. We will also talk to Stacey Abrams, former nominee for Georgia governor, who played a pivotal part of turning Georgia blue in 2020, as well as Pete Buttigieg, former transportation secretary. I hope you'll join us tomorrow morning on The Weekend, starting at 7 a.m. Eastern.